signs, we're seeing these signs. She then went the next 2 steps, so then she files, scared to death of the guy, because it's just crazy deal. Files for protective order. So he's wealthy, got an attorney connected to the judge, gets this psychologist. The psychologist writes this 2-page report, and it says, if he sexually abused his son, he did it in a loving manner.
Mm-hmm.
How sick is that?
It's really sick.
But it's not, that isn't unusual, is it?
No.
There's some crazy guy who's now dead who wrote a book about parental alienation syndrome?
Yes.
And said that pedophilia was okay?
Yeah, there's people out there that believe that, I'm sure.
I just thought that was the sickest thing I ever heard. And then the little boy told something to his grandfather that the father was doing to him. He took the little boy home, went over and shot and killed the guy.
Yeah.
So he's in prison for the rest of his life, I guess, but he's a hero there. The guards salute him, and all the prisoners who hate pedophiles think he's a champion.
Right.
My little granddaughters looked up at me and said something like that. I don't know that I don't have a gun, so I don't know that I would be able to kill, but I could sure swing a baseball bat pretty hard.
Well, I had a gun, and somebody broke into my house and stole it because I'm sure they were thinking I was going to retaliate, and everybody that you talk to would know I had grounds to retaliate, but that is not what I would ever do. And even though my husband was very, very violent and threatened to blow off my head, I never once threatened him. His ex-wife, one day she jumped in my car and sat in it, and I ran away. And she had her daughter come out of the house with a gun. She was going to blow my head off. And I did some moves, and I got her out of the car and got back in and drove away quick. And I drove right to the police. And they basically, the state troopers came down to the police station, the sheriff's department, and they basically told me they were going to arrest me. And by this point, it was getting so ridiculous, I would just laugh at them. And I said, send me the papers in the mail. Because there was no grounds for arresting me, and they would not go after anybody who ever threatened me. One of the police, when I was out there at the barracks one day, they basically said that I was trying to make this stuff up just to frame my ex, but that's not true because that's not my personality. The police will accuse you of anything because they're protecting who they're going to protect, and that's their goal. Where there was one state trooper out there at the barracks who saw what my ex was doing and who he had in our household, and he knew the criminal history of the woman in the household, and he wondered why the judge was tolerating that. So I had somebody in my corner, and as soon as that man sided with me, he was gone from the barracks. I could never find him again. And that was really frustrating.
Well, when I met with Joan and Frank Leone, Robert Leone's parents, when they had their trial, the Pennsylvania State police officers got up on the stand and were just laughing about how they beat the hell out of him. And she turned to the attorney and said, how in the world, what? They're convicting themselves. And they knew it was all set up and that they were going to skate, and they did. Unbelievable. Have you seen that video?
I've seen the video of the beating, yes. That's really sad. I've also seen the arrogance in the police and in the courts. They know what the outcome is going to be because that's already predetermined. So no matter how ridiculous what they say in the testimony, it doesn't matter. So yes, they do get arrogant and carried away. And they say some of the dumbest things, and anybody looking through those transcripts would say they're convicting themselves. But that's not what happens at the end of the day with the court order. And I guess that's been the most heartbreaking thing is I've heard testimony that you would think that he's just burying himself. At one point, he had 2 attorneys, and one called the other one to the stand. And if you look in any books, that's usually the attorney's last resort behavior for getting themselves out of a bad hole, and it's really not accepted in court. But they did it anyway, just to to try to show that they're not really doing anything bad, but yet record says that they are doing something bad. And that testimony was allowed to go on. So it was just a game. That's all this was. It was a game. What's that?
Discuss about how your court orders, how you got the court orders before we even got back from your court dates?
Yes. Sometimes the court orders were very interesting. I would get them before the end of the hearing. Before the hearing concluded, there would be a court order in the mailbox when I got home. And given the mail should have arrived at 3 o'clock that day, and the hearing was, at 4 or ending at 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, how could I get a court order in my mailbox prior to the court order actually ending? Other times I wouldn't get a court order for 12 to 18 months, and then it would show up, and it, of course, would be exactly what my ex wanted. Court orders got lost in the mail, misdirected, opened. Just everything you can imagine happened to court orders.
Interesting.
Talk about how the kids knew what was in the court orders before you did.
Yes, I was on the phone with my children, and sometimes the children would tell me what was going to be in the court order before it was issued. So I know that my ex and his attorneys were writing the court orders prior to the hearings, and the judge would just wait to send them at a convenient time.
Sometimes lost track of the fact that you hadn't had a hearing yet.
Sometimes he lost track of the fact that the hearing didn't go.
That's
Yes.
just, now I thought I had it bad, but that's even worse. I had one where I asked the judge at the start of the hearing, I said, Your Honor, have you already written an order deciding this even before you've heard from me? Since you didn't allow me to file a written response. I'm not going to answer your questions. And I had 6 court watchers in the back of the courtroom. They were on that side. I'm here and the judge is up there. And when he got to the end of the very short hearing, he turned his left and read the order. It was just, it was just plain.
Yeah, it does become a game. And at one hearing, I had lined up a bunch of witnesses. Well, let me step back. I've had hearings where my ex would know I had witnesses coming forward, and they'd change the hearing like the hour before the hearing would start. All of a sudden it would be canceled and postponed and rescheduled. So sometimes I had to play slick and not let him know of anything. I was worried, of course, that the phones were tapped, because sometimes they found out information that there would be no other way that they knew unless the phones were tapped. So one day I surprised them and had maybe 20 people show up to testify on my behalf, and the judge was floored. He wouldn't let anybody testify for me, of course. One lady insisted on speaking, and he acknowledged her, but he wouldn't let anybody get up on the stand and testify.
You let her talk, but it didn't count.
Right.
What would you tell people? 99% of the people out there don't have a clue, and most of the 1% that have a clue about this are the bad guys that know how the whole thing works. And what would you say to people out there that this hasn't happened to yet, or who think that our government's fair and that the courts are fair? How would you warn people? What would you say?
They're in for a rude awakening if they think the court systems are fair. They have to be prepared for the worst fight. If something is very important, we're not talking speeding tickets, but something very important to them, the court battle is going to be dragged out as long as possible, cost as much as humanly possible, and it's going to make you bleed blood that you didn't even think you had.
That was such a good line. I had to get it written down.
The courts have become so surreal that you would think that you're in a reality show where everything is staged. The outcome's already known. It's just a matter of making the most dramatic statements and court presentations. And the attorneys play their games and say things that are very dramatic and awe-inspiring, but the lies are just amazing. What do you call it? Perjury. They never even look at perjury, and it happens all the time, and it's a non-issue. They don't care that the person is lying, and you can show them that they're lying, and it doesn't even matter. The person who has the most money is going to win. Having been in a violent marriage, knowing what my husband at the time was capable of through his verbal threats and his intimidation during the course of the marriage, I didn't want to get a divorce. It's easier to stay in this lifestyle than to get a divorce. That's why I didn't want to do anything. But at some point when my child, my oldest daughter at the time, was saying to me, "Mom, you need to leave Dad," I knew I had to answer to my children and provide a better life for them, because they didn't need to go through that. When they were babies, I could buffer it and keep him away from them. But as they got older, they saw what was going on, and they saw how stupid it was, and they were turning into teenagers, and I didn't want them picking a mate like that. Hopefully they'll learn from what I hear from talking to my children over the years. Nobody is really planning on getting married and having children. They don't like marriage, and they're not really interested in that whole institution. So I'll be surprised, what happens with the children.
Well, maybe they learn more from this than you might have thought if they have that attitude. Because I think it's probably a healthy attitude after seeing what happened with you.
Right. Hopefully it'll come out for the best, and hopefully they will have good lives and find mates and, have a happy life. I think it's fun to share your life with somebody, and that's what I wanted marriage to be, and that's not what was happening. I didn't need to be scared and intimidated in my own house. My friends, after I got separated, they told me over the years some strange things that they noticed in our marriage. One of them, which I can't forget, it's so odd that I didn't even pick up on it in my own marriage. They said that my husband never addressed me by my name. So I was a non-entity, and that came out in the courts.
Hey, you or what?
Just pick up
Get
the
this,
dishes,
yeah,
go
that.
get the dishes, do that, do this. And you just get so used to it, you don't realize how demeaned you've become. And then when my children were old enough to point that out to me, I realized it was really bad. And I had moved to the house of my dreams that my children and I found. He was not going house hunting with us, and we had lived in a small house, and I wanted someplace better to raise our children. And when I found this place, the children just loved it, and we bought it, and I wanted it to be a happy place. And the violence escalated when we moved up here. I didn't need that. When we lived in Gettysburg, I had the FBI and the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and the state trooper at my house. They wanted to question my husband for gun trafficking. So I needed to get away from whatever was happening down there, and when we moved up here, it didn't stop, it escalated, and then I realized we're close to the border. So it was all very crazy.
What's wrong? What's wrong with the system? How in the world can this possibly happen?
I think corruption breeds corruption. When you have somebody bad doing bad things, they need bad people to cover their bad parts. I didn't get involved in all that. I was Catholic, homeschooling, mother, and wife. It was real simple. I raised my children. I was involved with the church. I was involved with our homeschooling group. I had our kids in sports and music lessons and all the beautiful things in the world. Horse lessons. I had a garden. I was cooking and canning and cleaning. I was working. I was volunteering. I was a foster mother. I was involved with WIC. I was doing all the things that I think people should do when they have the means. We had money, so I had time to do all this stuff. Sure, I could have gone and got another job, but we didn't need more money. We needed to raise the children in a home that was peaceful. He had come from a violent home, and my children didn't need that. And when I look back, I see him doing what his father did, and it continued into our household, and I tried to stop it, and now I worry that our children are going to be violent like that.
what was the name of the judge who heard that your husband threatened to kill you, who heard that you were a victim of unbelievable abuse, and didn't even order him for a psych evaluation?
The first judge was Judge Kenny Siemens from Susquehanna County, Pennsylvania. He's still there. I tried my best to make sure he wasn't reelected, but he was reelected. And I was glad to recuse him. When I filed my petition, it was a 32-page petition I filed on my own, pro se, because I had burned through a lot of attorneys and wasn't getting anywhere. So when I started doing things pro se, I just filed it on my own, and the judge, I'll never forget it, he went white, and I thought he was going to fall off his chair, and he looked to opposing counsel and he said, "Do you have any objections?" And I think the opposing counsel was shocked that I could do that, and I did it, and I got high fives from a whole bunch of people in town when I walked out. And the next judge was Judge Brendan Vanston. I later recused him. He was from Tunkhannock, Pennsylvania, and he came up here to Susquehanna County to hear my case. And he toed the party line, and he wouldn't give me more time with the children. He wouldn't uphold any custody orders, and he was very insulting and demeaning in the hearings.
It was Brendan.
Vanston, Brendan, Vanston. And he's in Wyoming County, Tunkhannock, Pennsylvania.
You think these guys go to a special school where they just learn to be pricks? Or
Do the judges go to a special school? I would say they do. I don't know where they go to school, but I'm sure it would be surprising if people would know where they get this kind of education to be so mean and disrespectful. I do think they have their own little cliques and groups.
you know, you're one of approximately 1,200 people that I'm going to meet with, and over half of you are children in family courts. And surprisingly, most are women.
Well, it's good that people are speaking out and saying that they've been hurt. The courts are bogged down with custody issues, and if the judges would look at the damage they've done, they would say it's their fault. They should say that. They've caused the backlog. I wouldn't want anybody to be in court for 12 years. I've been in court for 12 years, and I still have petitions going because I still don't get to see my children as per the court order, even though it's a raunchy order. I still don't get to see them. That should go in front of a jury, for one thing, because no jury would ever do this to their neighbors. And I think we should have standing juries that listen to these hearings and decide them immediately. Having to wait months and months and months for a hearing is appalling. That means you don't get to see your children for all that time, and the judges don't care. All they're in it is for the money. It's huge money. You're talking about judges. I know there's payoffs. There's been so many documented cases of parents going underground with their cameras and proving the payoff, so I know they exist. That's not surprising. And paying off psychiatrists and things like that, it's so easy to do. So it's a lot of money involved, and when you know the kid is going to be in court until they're 18, it's a gravy train. That's all it is. So if they can continue to drag it out, they're going to get a lot of money. My ex had an attorney for all that time. That's a lot of money. I paid attorneys thousands upon thousands of dollars. It's amazing amounts of money to do nothing.
Yeah, another of our proposals is that all family court issues should be decided by a jury rather than by a judge. But I think you're right. It would have to be a jury that serves for a longer period of time and gets to understand it, because you'd be rolling into juries every half a day or less.
I'd like to see court set up where there's a standing jury in the county, and when you have a hearing to present, it would just go in front of that jury for that month, whoever is appointed, and they hear the court hearings. And I think they should have court hearings at night too, not always during the day, because we're poor. We're trying to hold down jobs, and all they do, you know, my ex, he didn't care. He was self-employed. He could go to work or not go to work. The money didn't matter to him. So I was struggling to hold down jobs, go to court, and see the children. I never missed a court hearing. I never missed a custody exchange, even when the kids I knew wouldn't show up for years on end. I never missed domestic relations hearings. He missed all sorts of stuff, but I didn't. And it cost me a lot of money with lost jobs, with finagling with employers to let me have time and then making up time. It cost me a lot in miles because they would move the hearings far away just because I couldn't afford to drive there. All sorts of games like that.
What else would you like to say?
Our country has been ruined by these family courts, and they need to look at the problem and fix it. We've ruined a whole generation of children and separated families where they didn't need to be separated. That exposes children to crime and poverty and a whole bunch of other bad problems out in the community. Kidnapping, prostitution, and drugs. All these children are vulnerable because they're home alone. They're latchkey children. A lot of time these kids are just sitting at home with no parents around. My kids, despite the fact that he had money and wealth after he lost his wife and women, the children were left home alone for days and weeks on end, and he wouldn't give them to me to take care of them. So I know it happens. It happened to me. My children could have come with me while he went off on his vacations instead of leaving the children sit at home alone. So there's millions, hundreds of thousands of children being left alone. And they're easy pickings for somebody who wants to traffic in children and get them started in a business like drugs and prostitution. And it's happening more and more.
Okay, any last thoughts?
No, I think that about covers it.
Do you have any hopes for what the movie might be able to accomplish?
I think a lot of people will be blown away by normal people talking about the corruption. I know my parents, who are both social workers. My dad was a retired Air Force, then he did social work for 20 years. He was shocked and appalled that the courts would do this to me. He couldn't believe it, and I think there's more people out there who are going to be amazed. At first they'll deny that this is true, but they'll have to say, if that many simple American, middle-class America is coming forward and saying this is what's going on, they're going to have to believe it. I know my family could not believe that a court order could be issued and I wouldn't get protected, that my children could be taken. They thought I was making up stories, and I would send them copies of the court orders and they would still be in shock and amaze. So I'm glad this movie is getting made. I hope it's in theaters. I hope it goes to churches and social organizations and hits the social media so everybody can see it. Because people need to see what we've done to ourselves. Our country is imploding with all the damage done.
Like we have a couple people here who pulled up when we
Okay.
came up. No, I was just going to say, it's when we came up to sit down and they asked about the movie. And did you know anything about any of this stuff before?
You guys were just driving by, you didn't see it on the internet?
No. We were just driving. We normally come to this park just to hang out and play cards or whatever.
It's a beautiful park.
It's
Quiet.
You guys are married?
No.
No?
Actually, we're going through. We have a little one that we have custody of too. That we're going back and forth to court with now.
Yeah, we raised her for 5
5
years,
years.
and now they found the dad. Lives in Syracuse, and we're fighting because he wants custody of her. And we raised her for 5 years, and here he comes along, just known her for 2, and we may lose. You know, we may lose
Yeah.
because he's the biological father, and
Right.
there's nothing I can do about it.
Well,
And it
there's
hurts
a
every day.
precedent
Her last-
yesterday
when-
that
when you mentioned your kids struggling when you went to pick them up or drop them off at the location, last week we had the same situation with her. She ran. When they pulled up, she ran, and we couldn't.
She
We had to go
cried
find
in the
her.
car.
You know, persuasion. I didn't go over there because it's too emotional for me. I don't want to see her.
It is.
She knows him as daddy.
Right.
You know, and he doesn't like that because now he's in the, you know, it's just crazy the way everything is, you know. And
And we
Dur-
Our lawyers like, preparing us for the word. We're not giving up. They basically just want us to say, here, take it. That's not going to happen. The judge decides on what happens, and we have to go with that. That's where we're leaving it at.
Now, did you adopt her?
No, we didn't even adopt her. We never knew that he would ever show up because we know the mom is not doing anything to get her back. We never had no idea that he was going to show up.
Yeah.
At one custody exchange, I had a bodyguard, and he would drive, and I would get the kids ready to go, and they didn't want to go back to their father's house. They would take off their clothes and try to stab me and punch the windows out, just violent stuff like that. And eventually I'd get them back in the car, and this one time, the youngest one, we were headed to the custody exchange spot, and he passed out, and I thought he was so scared that he died. He just went limp in my arms in the van. I had a van at the time, and he just went limp. And I said to the man, I said, "What are we supposed to do?" And I thought my kid had died just from fear alone. And he eventually came to, and I gave him back to the father. But it's scary what can happen at custody exchange. And that kid told me one day at custody exchange, as he walked back to his father, he would turn like into a little robot, and he looked back at me and he said, "Thanks for nothing," and he just like spit those words out at me.
Yeah, they're angry with you because it seems like
Yes,
you make them go
I was
when you
making
don't
them be
want to.
abused, and he didn't want that anymore.